Good afternoon and welcome to the session. I think a lot of discussions till now were on how to scale up renewable energy. And I think now we'll get into a different aspect of it. Something which has been associated with renewable energy for quite some time, looking at how we can give energy access. And I think that topic is still relevant today going forward. I mean, just quoting some figures which I saw just before the session. 260 million people in India as of 2020 did not have access to electricity. I don't know how much that has changed. And over 100 million did not have access to more than 4 hours of electricity. I think the case in point that we want to make here is that we might have actually achieved and delivered that, connected these people. How successful have we been in ensuring that they get a certain level of service? And what is the relevance of renewable energy technologies in providing that electricity service, especially to the last mile? And I think that will be the discussion on transition that will be happening. And without a further ado, I'll just dive into the questions. We prepared some questions, thought that those would be interesting. And in the middle, if anyone has questions from the audience, please feel free to ask, raise your hand, or wait for the end, whatever place. So we'll start with you, Rohit. First of all, OMC has been one of the early developers, and you guys have a very impressive and ambitious plan to scale that up in terms of mini grids and microgrids. My understanding is 268 microgrids functioning till now. 280, and another 1,000 in the pipeline. So first of all, if you could tell us, how do you see this sector evolving? Where do you think this will go, and what are the opportunities there?
Okay, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Rohit Chandra. I'm the CEO and co-founder for OMC Power. Like Ronnie said, we have about 280 power plants. We generate, we store, and we distribute electricity in rural India. Most of the plants are in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. The first plant came live in 2012. In aggregate, we have something like 15 megawatt hour of generation and storage capacity and a grid of about 500 kilometers, serving about 25,000 customers, out of which about 7,500 are small and medium enterprises. We do something which we call the ABC business model, which basically means that you have an anchor at every plant, which is in our case a telecom tower, because they've been traditionally depending on fossil fuel, and we replace that by renewable energy. So you have an anchor which is kind of drawing 24/7 power from you. And in addition to that, you serve small and medium enterprises and households. So you have a combination of 3 segments on one platform. Now, like you said, Ronnie, the sector has been continuously evolving. We've seen our company grow from, starting in 2012 up until, I think, 2019, when we had about 100 plants. And between 2019 and now, we have 280 plants, and in the next 18 months, we'll get to 1,000. We recently announced, in 2017, we announced a partnership with Mitsui, one of the leading Japanese companies who's the largest shareholder in OMC. Just on 31st of May this year, we also announced a partnership with Chubu Electric, which is one of Japan's leading leading energy utilities of Japan. And we see that there is strong demand. There is strong demand for quality power and for power when people need it. Now, different segments in the market need it at different times. For instance, telecom needs electricity 24/7. They require a service level of 100% because our mobile phones can never be stopped, right? So they need 100% service levels. If they have, the traditional Discom electricity, they have to put their own diesel sets to supplement that, to ensure that they get 100% uptime. Now, that is the job that OMC does, that OMC replaces their diesel sets with OMC electricity. Secondly, small and medium enterprises need electricity, reliable electricity of a certain quality, and especially when their businesses have to run, right? They invest in machines and equipment, and they expect electricity to run, and electricity of a certain quality, and then the households require electricity during what we call the peak hours, right? Between say 5:30 p.m. to 10:30, and mini grids and micro grids, whatever you call them, if they go and satisfy this requirement of ensuring that consumers have quality electricity when they need it at a price which is affordable based on the other alternatives that they have, and then go out there and completely eliminate fossil fuel, I think that is the future, and that there is space for such a model to exist.
Yeah, okay. Sort of a quick supplementary question, which was that during my own experiences of having traveled in Bihar and Jharkhand, I saw a lot of microgrids with actually the price points of electricity were higher than what the grid was charging them, but still the demand was a substantial demand existed because the consumers somehow have now got addicted to the concept of electricity, and for them it's become a fact of life. So any thoughts on that and how that is driving?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think this question does come to us many times, and I would say that the consumer in India, or any part of the world, they are the best judge of value. They are the best judge of value, and when they look at pricing points of mini grids or micro grids, at least for OMC, I can say that we priced it like India has priced mobile telephony. So it's like a prepaid package. There are different packages depending upon your requirements. It could be a 6-hour package with the bare minimum, or it could be a 24/7 package. Now, in the eyes of the consumer, they find that the package prices are very affordable. Just to give you an example, for 150 rupees a month flat, they get 6 hours of assured electricity during peak hours with a service level of 99.95%. Now, when they look at corresponding amounts that they have to pay to other service providers, then and the service levels they get thereof, then I think they exercise their decision whether to take mini grids or not. And if I would extend the logic even beyond villages, I think if you look at even a place like Gurgaon today, and all the high-rise societies that are in Gurgaon, I could argue the case that mini grids are already in play there, because every society has a mini grid within the society, and you are powering those houses out there with fossil fuel, charging 25, 26 rupees a unit. So I think they're already in play in big cities. We are bringing them to villages, and we're bringing them to villages with green energy.
Absolutely, and the Gurgaon example is a very good example, because I know there is a transition happening. It's not happening to renewables. What is happening is that they're setting up battery banks and using these battery banks to power initially, rather than depending on diesel.
But then even if you look at the capex recovery through a battery bank, right? So the capex is ultimately going to be paid by the resident, right? So it'll be rolled into the energy tariff, and ultimately, if you look at the tariffs in Gurgaon, for instance, there would be upward of 22 rupees a unit.
Agreed. Moving forward to Upendra. Upendra, I know you deal a lot, you work in the other facet, which is there in DRE, which is products, specifically, solar products, and which are not related to mini grids. And I think there was a Gogla report which actually said that the Indian market actually makes up more than 50% of the overall, global market. How has that fared over the last 2-3 years, especially with COVID? And where do you see that moving? I think that's something which is always under the radar. It's never acknowledged.
Well, firstly, I mean, a little bit about Seekanetics. We are a sustainability advisory and investments firm. We have been looking at resource sustainability sandbox for a very, very long time. And I think when Rohit was talking about 2012, when he went into mini grids, I think we were amongst the first who encouraged them to go down that path. And, we had healthy debates, philosophical debates, etc. Coming to your question, Ronnie, we have been looking at access, be it products or infra, because I characterize mini grids as infra and you have products. And, part of the problem has been we have always looked at both with the same lens from a policy dimension. And so we confuse the people. It's like confusing between pager, fixed line and mobile. And if you had the same policy sentiment and same pricing structures, from an optics point, you would have killed all three technologies, not one, all three. So if you look at it from the view of pure play standalone products, India has been a leader when it has come to looking at lighting products. You also have had pay-as-you-go systems, which are also called SHS. There has been some uptake, etc. A lot of government programs. In fact, contrary to the point, even the year when government announced that they have fully electrified all the households, the biggest buyer of SHS that year was the government. You can look at the MNRE annual report there. And so that tells you that these systems, in whatever form, have a significant role to play in that power for all vision for the country. So I think the government is not necessarily saying power for all means only the grid, right? Grid certainly can be used, should be used to the extent it is possible. Can you do a product assurance on that? We haven't seen any examples of that yet. And in fact, if you started allowing a policy system where you could have a penalty for non-performance, you will see many more customers coming his way or buying other products. So in the last 2 years, you certainly had supply chain disruptions, Ronnie, because a lot of the material used to come. But there is increasingly a push under the Atmanirbhar scheme to try and create an India-oriented value chain. We still have a little bit of a challenge when it comes to panels, but you're seeing some. That is one. What you're also seeing is beyond the lighting, there is a whole thrust of DRE products which has emerged. What you're now calling under different labels. One is called productive use of renewable energy, etc. But you're now seeing micro cold storages, bulk mill chillers. You're seeing solar-powered oil expellers, flour mills, solar dryers. I have seen some aerators in the shrimp farming, etc. So it increasingly seeing different products emerge. So in my view, the market is ripe for growth. You will continue to see some challenges when it comes to basic products. So if you take the case of solar lighting, the volumes, since you referenced the Gogla report, we did that for them when they were looking for strategy for their own self. Do they survive or not survive? And what we pointed out to them is the basic products will go away over a period of time. Because it is natural. Aspirationally, how many of us had cycle ownerships 50 years back versus car ownership? And you see the ratios today. So you will see the volumes go down, but the value go up. And what you're increasingly seeing is financiers responding to that. You're also seeing government programs, going up. So you used to have a standard SHS government program used to be a 20 watt or a 30 watt system. Today you have a 100 watt and there are states which even consider a 200 watt package. So that is a recognition that what is the need on the ground. So as long as the service providers, solution providers, product guys respond to the needs on the ground, you will see increasing uptake. You have several companies now looking at the similar, knowledge to apply it. You talked of batteries. A lot of them are applying that in the batteries thing. And some of that knowledge is going into other sectors as well. So I feel DRE is a big, really, kind of extrapolate the label across several segments, is a very large, I would say, domain. But within the subdomains, several subdomains have figured out a way to grow. The challenge is many of these are younger, smaller companies. So we tend to confuse a ventures challenge with that of the sectoral challenges or the technology challenges. Rohit gave a great example of mini grids as an example, right? We talked about this as urban mini grids about 5 years back. There's a public report we wrote saying Gurgaon already has these urban mini grids. What can you do to green them, right? And you realize that the traditional form of mini grid approach technology will not work, right? And we worked with ABB to come up with something at that point. So that's just an illustration of the opportunity the space has. And the infra side of it needs to be looked differently. The product side of it needs to be looked differently. And we should also not, in my view, confuse between technology and the business model. So they're all interlinked, but one needs to figure out where the problem is. So a lot of DRE momentum is stuck because of policy frameworks. It's not necessarily because the product is not good.
I agree. And I have a follow-up question later, but first let me move on to Ms. Chaudhary. Ma'am, can you first of all, you're the only CSO, as you said, on the panel. Could you please tell us about Power for All, and also tell us the work that you've been undertaking in India and in Africa, and specifically where do you stand with respect to energy access?
Thank you so much, Ronnie. Thank you, Economic Times, for the opportunity. So I am Debanchana Chaudhary. I'm the India Country Director for Power for All. Power for All is a global campaign, and we collaborate with 300 plus partners across Asia and Africa. And what do we do? So basically, our motto is to end energy poverty faster, and we do it through accelerators like solutions, evidence-based advocacy, research, and we definitely feel that DRE is one of those elements that will be able to catalyze this change, that will be able to make the change happen faster. I'll share a bit of an example, like our work that we do in India. So before Power for All launched in India around 7 years ago, so we just celebrated our 7th birthday, and our team went around in India, especially Jharkhand, to find out where is the gap. And we found that the gap is there in every rural household in Jharkhand, be it health, be it education, be it your agriculture. That is where the gap lies, and that is where the entire, the idea came that Power for All, it actually has to live up to the name that there should be power for everybody. So we built a lot of evidence, Ronnie. What we do is we are a technical partner for Jareda in Jharkhand. In India, Jharkhand is our focus state, and we work at the intersections of health, intersections of agriculture and employment. We also feel that DRE plays a great role in creating a lot of employment. There's a lot of employment generation by the sector, which is not often talked about. And that is where Power for All comes in, the research comes in. And we are a campaigning and advocacy organization working in collaboration. Partnership model is the model. And that's about us.
Any results to share from the evidence-based results that you've seen in Jharkhand?
Yes, of course. So we have a campaign called Power for Health, and in Jharkhand, for the last 2 months, what we did, we went around 600 PHCs and CHCs, and we wanted to find out what are the solarization needs of these PHCs and CHCs. So mind you, of this, around 30 to 40% PHCs and CHCs are so-called solarized already. We went around and we found that 89% of PHCs and CHCs do not have electricity for at least 8 to 9 hours a day. So now you imagine the plight of a person. A PHC caters to roughly 2 to 3 blocks. So a person comes, sundown, it does not work. So electricity should not be that sundown, life cannot come to a standstill. And that is where our evidence is showcased and placed to create that policy change, to enable that policy change.
Thank you. Coming back to Rohit, I'll just do one more round of questions, and then we'll open it up for the audience, if there are any questions from the audience. Rohit, one thing is there, which is that, what do you see? How do you see the microgrids, mini grids, which have been standalone till now? Do you see them integrating with the grid in the future? Do you see them integrating as a franchisee, or maybe as a supplier, or as a generator?
So I think this is a kind of question which has been asked over the years again, and it always comes up. So the first challenge that we face is that, of course, we are standalone. We are an island today. We do our own generation, storage, and distribution. Now, when we look at our capacity utilization, so I must say that the continuous challenge that we face is that we have to upgrade capacity. So we have more or less 100% capacity utilization, and based on demand forecast, we are upgrading storage, distribution, and generation all the time. So more from an operational point of view, the team has never encountered the need to sell excess electricity anywhere else other than to our consumers. These 3 segments: telecom towers, small and medium enterprises and households. We've also been toying with the idea because, I come from the telecom industry where I spent 25 years of my life, and that industry has done infrastructure sharing quite successfully. As you can see, many mobile operators sit on one telecom tower. So I think we've been trying to see what could be different ways of this kind of partnership between, say, a mini grid player and a discom, and how could we complement the great work that they do, right? Because we are sitting at the tail end and trying to see the challenges that our customers face. We feel that the biggest challenge that they face is that, first of all, like you said, that there are 8, 10, 12 hours in the day, depending upon the location, where there may or may not be availability of electricity. So that's one gap that has to be filled. The other gap is that when electricity is available, there could be voltage issues. So voltage would not be enough to drive optimal performance from equipment, especially for small medium enterprises, say even a petrol station, etc., etc. So there could be quality issues. And then thirdly, they don't sometimes know what time of the day will it be available, right? So I think if we develop a model of partnership, in principle, we feel that if we could complement and fill this gap, right, which basically means that if you just appoint us as a distribution franchisee, for instance, I don't think we will be able to add much value. We will only be able to add value if we are able to supplement some tail-end generation, some tail-end storage, and combine it with efficient on-the-ground customer service to make sure that people get electricity to the right quality when they need it. And I think there is, this general perception that rural India doesn't want to pay, but I would say that they want to pay when value is delivered to them.
I think they pay more than what urban consumers pay per unit.
Yeah, if you look at it purely from per unit, without considering what all goes inside that unit, you could argue that case as well.
Any thoughts on the kind of policy reform that is required to do this policy regulatory reform? I know there was something which CRC was looking at about 5-6 years ago of how to treat microgrids as a entity. Any progress on that?
So I think as far as, state by state, the situation is slightly different. I think UP is most evolved in terms of a very stable regulation and policy framework. But, as far as this partnership model is concerned, I guess there is this existing framework of distribution franchisee, which allows you to do some things and does not allow you to do certain other things. So we've done some amount of work on this in Bihar, but I guess the issues are more intense. It requires, I think, a much broad and deeper, framework of cooperation with different stakeholders to try this model at, say, a feeder level in some state, ensure that we can prove that, look, it can bring, effective customer service and better revenue collection in the days ahead, etc. So we are quite open-minded, but I think the process, in our view, is intense. And at the same time, there is possibly in the future enough room for multiple players to coexist with certain amount of infrastructure sharing. If you draw parallels from other industries like airlines and telecom, which are again in some way infrastructure industries, so you have an Air India, you also have private airlines. If you look at telecom, you have BSNL still, right? And you have Airtel and you have Jio and whatnot. So I guess what will be the eventual model for this industry, time will tell. But probably there's space for consumers to get what they need by somewhat effective competition, and for somewhat market forces to evolve what customer service means, etc.
I think that's the catch which is there.
Could I add to that? I think this has really been a core facet of this sector from the time at least I have seen it. Even before technology evolved, people were wondering what will happen to this infra. Will it feed into the grid? Will grid allow it to happen? The reality on the ground is threefold. On one front, around middle of the last decade, for the first time, the government realized that there is an infra underway. And it is better to recognize that you need to provide a longevity to this investment or recognize it. It is well captured in the national tariff policy also, where for the first time, they insisted within 6 months, every state regulator, electricity regulator should set up a framework. Very few states did. So I think the first and foremost is what is the political will on this. I think far more than, because policy framework on paper is not going to result to an outcome if there is no political will. So I think that's one dimension. There are 6 states which have a policy framework for interconnectivity and a way, and in varying degrees, a way for you to either sell into the grid or buy from the grid. The fine line on it, the guidelines on it, some drafts are there, some were taken up, some weren't found politically palatable. We have been part of several of those actually. And as a small boutique firm, we are very, very direct also, because we don't have any angst to grind on either side, right? So that's one aspect to it. The second aspect to it is, do we see these micro utilities as just generators, or do we tap into the true value they bring? The true value they bring is they are consumer facing and service oriented enterprises. Today, the biggest challenge the DISCOMs have, why they are not able to collect despite CAMs, etc., because they are never able to, by and large, in many parts, uphold the value promise that they claim that they are presenting. So yes, there is a 16-hour supply. But if it is not going to come to me when I need it to run my iron, I'm a presswala guy, I'm not able to run it, then it's a waste, right? And that is what drives your earlier question, right? Why are people willing to pay? So the aspect around this interconnectivity will become real is, what is the true cost of assured power, that baselining, and what is the ongoing operating spend you have at a feeder, sub-feeder, transformer level, substation to transformer. That decoupling and public recognition as a baseline is almost the only way to do a price discovery on this. So if that is done, you will see if the model seeing some value, right? The last bit on this is, let's say nothing is to be done, but you are now going to a future where you want to green your grids. Allow these guys to have storage, right? And resell power, create that. Today, that doesn't exist. They can generate. The only reason mini grids are still continuing is because the Electricity Act has one loose element. And, a lot of people went to, it went to the Attorney General in 2012 by the Forum of Regulators. And the AG at that time clarified, yes, this is a thought through provision and we should not prevent them. So I think the answer lies not in a framework being developed, but in a framework being implemented. So I think these are the 3. So political will, number 1. Number 2, baselining of costs. Number 3, flexibility to run a service enterprise with whatever components are needed to deliver that promise. I think these are the 3 things. If you allow that, you will see many more enterprises becoming viable.
I agree. Thanks. Coming back to you again, Upinder, and this is a question I've been meaning to ask for some time. I know you guys are also financing EVs. And where do you see, I think for DRE, a very, very big opportunity in the future lies in the electrification of the transport sector, especially in the rural areas. And I think the pain is there now, considering the fact that diesel prices and petrol prices are what they are. How do you see this market segment panning out? And do you see that? Do you feel that the rural areas, or the fact that the areas where energy access is a challenge, can the EV revolution, basically scale up DRE implementation?
No, I think great question, Ronnie. And I think it's not just around DRE implementation, because when we talk of access, I think we need to little bit broad base our optics on this. When we first started defining access, we thought, does somebody has an electricity bulb, right? And the impact indicator was, is the women crime coming down because now you have a street light? You pick up anybody. I'm being very simplifying it, but that was really the essence of it. Today, when you're talking of access, you're talking about them using it for multiple uses, right? From entertainment to, productive use, work from home in many cases. You talked about electrical, you have ROs now getting installed in homes, right? Because the water quality is not good, but now you have pipe water coming in. So what do you do? So I think the opportunity for electrification is immense. In case of particularly electric mobility, I think you will see two kinds of demand emerge. One is at a home level where you will be electrifying the two-wheelers themselves. You will also see some small charging infra coming at the village level for running a lot of the logistics, far more than consumer transport, logistics in the 30-40 kilometer range radius. And you will see them doing couple of trips. So you will see that as now, that is where I think a mini grid which is far more focused at a localization of infra becomes a very relevant otherwise somebody has to again put that up. It will be put up as a standalone thing, and then they will have to assure themselves through either solar panels and batteries. So why not tap into an infra which is already there? And I think these guys and a few other guys have been piloting it. I think in Bihar you piloted a few, if I'm not mistaken.
If I may just add here, I think like you just said, the vision that we have is that OMC evolves as a kind of rural utility beyond just providing electricity to these three segments, and EV is a very complementary fit. So we see most of the OMC power plants becoming also EV stations. So this is like a gas station of the future. So you already have the infrastructure, yeah, and you have bits to add, and it becomes so for instance, you could say OMC has 280 electricity charging stations already existing and soon going to 1,000. So this is going to happen. You would see clean drinking water as a supplementary infrastructure, which is going to be added on. It's already being tried out. We see cold chain being added on. We are also partnered with a digital platform which does like a LinkedIn for farmers. They have millions of farmers on that LinkedIn, and we are partnered with them to more tightly integrate with the agri ecosystem. So you'll see these companies evolve as a rural utility and provide more sustained form of rural development, which is going to be probably better than how our cities have evolved over time.
I think you're bang on, and I think the breadth of the opportunity that is there, and why we usually as an industry not look at it because the demand is actually quite large, but it's distributed, and that's where the transaction cost of getting and servicing that demand is one of the biggest challenges. Now moving on to one of the other areas which is there, and I think Upendra brought out that word which caught me, was political will. And I think one of the things that we must be aware of is the fact that to drive anything, if there is some political will behind it, it gets implemented faster. And I think one of the drivers of political will can obviously be livelihoods and jobs creation, and that's where I'd like to come to Ms. Chaudhary. Ma'am, what have you've done some studies around livelihood creation, especially for DRE sector. Please, what has been the results? I mean, is it a employment positive sector? What are the impacts, etc.?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ronnie. But before that, I will also, talk a little bit about EVs and the baseline that we had done in Jharkhand. And we found out that, EVs as a last mile solution has a huge potential. Completely agreed on the challenges that Rohit and Mr. Upendra has already shared. But EVs per se can improve the lives not only of businesses, but also individuals. There are a lot of women who are depending only on the spouses in order to go and run, even for a vaccination. So an EV solution at the last mile can really solve a lot of problems. Coming to the DRE and the employment sector. So we have launched a research called Powering Jobs, and we just concluded the second phase of the research, in fact. And in India, we targeted like 50 such companies where we wanted to find out what is the gender parity in the sector, how the sector is evolving after the pandemic, how the sector is growing post-pandemic, what are the effects in the sector. So there's a bit of a caveat. Since it was an online survey, it did not really reach out to the rural mass. We were not able to capture the clean cooking segments and so on and so forth. But what we saw since 2019, which was the last research, DRE sector jobs have actually declined. In 2019, we reported around 90,000 odd DRE sector jobs. This time we are reporting around 70,000 odd such jobs. And if we talk about gender parity, of the 5 countries where the survey was done, which includes African countries of Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and Zambia, India is the only country where female leadership accounted for less than 10%. So while we talk about transition, while we talk about just transition and leadership, employment in DRE is not doing as well or isn't as equitable as we would have wanted it to be. As as fast the sector is growing, it has a lot of potential for green jobs, and we know that once the transition actually kicks in, and there are pockets of Jharkhand, pockets of Chhattisgarh where people will be moving from an entire livelihood of fossil fuel to green jobs, and there'd be a lot of unskilled persons also over there. So how do we actually bridge that gap, and also take a moment to understand why women are not well represented, and where are the job losses that are happening in DRE sector?
I think that's a very relevant point, because diversity, especially in any sector, is only going to add to the growth of the sector. We have about 7 minutes left before the session comes to an end. Are there any questions from the audience, or we can go for another round? Anyone? Well, I think everyone's quiet. Okay. Then I will use the 7 minutes. Rohit, the micro utilities part was very, very interesting. Do you see the micro utility concept branching out and coming out as something called a RESCO as well? For example, one of the things which we found was there is a huge potential for standalone in the area, especially where you have all of your installations, standalone rooftop solutions or industry-based MSME solutions. Any thoughts on that, or any models that you've seen come up, which are basically servicing let's say MSMEs, especially when the power is not available from the grid, and they are actually taking reducing consumption of diesel?
Yeah, there's so many of these, and of course they can broadly be characterized into 2 parts. One which come, say, within the service area of the grid, right? Even if it's a mini grid, they are running for 5 to 7 kilometers at every location. So if there is something within the service area of the grid, it gets serviced through the grid. If not, then there are, like you said, more standalone solutions. We are serving a lot of them already, like banks, petrol stations, clinics, and a lot of other enterprises, schools, colleges, e-centers, which run their post offices, etc. So lots of those kinds of things. And then when I talk of the rural utility, I actually refer to services beyond electricity access. So these are services which are enabled with reliable electricity access. In the healthcare domain, we've tried telemedicine, remote diagnostics. So you could have a doctor sitting in, say, Gurgaon, looking at blood samples which are taken locally. You could have, like I said, clean drinking water solutions. We are sure that the next evolution for us is EV. We are talking to a few partners and trying to see that how could every OMC plant be converted to EV charging station, and also how could we facilitate the EV ecosystem in rural, say, Uttar Pradesh, and other things like which are more closely integrated with the agri ecosystem, like cold storages. So we have designed and partnered with some companies who have mini cold storages which can be erected in 1 week. They could be put either at the point of sale near the mandi, or they could be put closer to the point of production, and especially high yield crop being stored so that farmers don't have to sell their crop in distress. And then, like I said, a general digital e-commerce platform where farmers are interacting, kind of a LinkedIn for farmers, where OMC also integrates, because we are the face, we are locally present. We are not a digital platform, we are on the ground. So if our strength and the strength of the digital platform get combined, there's a lot that can be done in the agri ecosystem. And then I think ultimately We talk of, say, COP26, we talk of, being carbon neutral in so many years, etc. I think our villages have a unique opportunity of developing in a sustained manner and being actually positive from day one, right? So that's something that we aspire to contribute to.
Perfect. I just want to just back up with a couple of things. I think there's some studies which are already going on how to, basically, I would say reduce fossil fuel consumption in the aquaculture and the fisheries sector in Goa and Bengal. There's a lot of discussions going on, especially in Bengal. I know there was an example of healthcare. And Punjab also, there were some discussions that went on how to basically ensure that whatever healthcare facilities are developed are done using clean energy. Upendra, last question for you before that to Ms. Chaudhary. This is that financing. You mentioned somewhere in your answers that finances earlier. The assumption was that DRE is something where your regular standard financing agencies stay away from. But you said that is changing, right? So how do you see that change happening? Is it like the banks which are coming in and providing more financing, or are there NBFCs which specialize in this, which are coming in? Are there new products coming in? What is happening in this sector that we can actually see the scale going up?
Well, I think a bit of everything that you said, Ronnie. So let me illustrate it. But before that, since you had raised the question of RESCO, because that goes into financing as well, I think the approach to financing is simple, right? If the transaction cost can be enabled and the visible market is quite well structured, you will see a financing product emerge, right? So when you are talking of these standalone systems, so if you have, multi-kilowatt systems, you will, or maybe about 10, 15 kilowatts, you will 20 kilowatts and above, you will see some sort of quasi-RESCO models emerge. Anything below that, people would prefer either a service enabled through a mini grid, or wherever if there is a government scheme, etc., and it is affordable through a microfinancing thing, it can go through, or a livelihood financing if it is up to 7-8 lakhs through the local banks. But on the larger extent of how you are seeing the changes, I think 3-4 things have happened. One, the fact that technology can perform and support different kinds of functions is now well established. About 6 years back, people would wonder what happens if I have an inductive load running on this. Will this shut down? What will happen this way? So a lot of that has kind of gone away. So that has given some comfort. Secondly, any financer needs some benchmarks. What is the performance? What is the utility? How much people are buying? When they are buying? What is the predictability of the cash flows? I think with different models, some of that is becoming clearer. It is still very, very, I would say, challenging, because in several models you see significant seasonality around it. So the liquid backstopping, etc., the liquidity backstopping that you need is required. But what we are seeing is 3 things. One, you are seeing small, service area banks and small finance banks building products for several of them, going beyond the regular ticket size of 30, 40K. Second thing you are seeing is project-oriented finance emerge. Let's say take the case of micro cold storages. You are kind of seeing 3 kinds of financing models emerge. You are seeing the companies themselves getting enterprise level financing for RESCO like cooling as a service model, because now there is a better understanding of what the contract is, who's the off-taker, what is the payback, how does it perform, if you're doing pre-cooling, how does that work? So you've started seeing that. Not everybody has been able to scale, but that's a venture level issue. There's the difference between the two, right? So the second aspect on this is you're seeing several of the conventional financiers, partly driven by government's mandates and partly the push under PSL and others, now going up. IREDA actually took a long time, but I think now they're looking at you guys, right? Whereas in 2016 is when we did a initial due diligence and proposed an OMC, right? Nothing has changed. It's the same company. It just come a little bit further along. It was maybe around 100 mini grids at that time. Now it is 280, right? So I think it's a comfort with that. And the fact that now you are somehow seeing a balance sheet emerge in these companies. So I think it is the conventional mindset, but you also have a set of maybe 6 to 8 specialist financiers. Seekers Finance, which is our own arm, Caspian doing some work in this, Northern are doing some work, Samruti when it comes to doing at a retail level. So you are seeing that some of it requires, credit enhancement or risk guarantee support. Some of it requires, some other mechanism to enable that, but you are slowly seeing that pick up now.
Is data, especially data around performance, going to be something that you think needs to be improved? Data access and data availability.
Yeah, I think that will always be the case. The question is, the technology is distributed, the companies are distributed, the off-takers are distributed. It's a humongous task to aggregate all of that data. I think Clean has been trying this for 4 or 5 years. They haven't get. We have actually built our own proprietary database for about 150 companies that we keep on tracking how they have been doing, where the projects are coming, are the projects sustainable, not sustainable, etc. And that's what has allowed us to take this leap of faith and say, okay, now we can go and invest in these companies, right? So I think that is the only way. You'll have to go back. It's the same thing happened with rooftop. I mean, Azure, which was the largest utility player at that time, when they got their first rooftops funded by IRIDA, the collateral was a fully running utility plant, which was twice that megawatt size. So you can imagine how much the sector has come.
It's been a huge change. Mr. Chaudhary, last question to you. One of the things that we talk about, and at the end of the day, especially in the DRE sector, we're talking about talking to human beings, and most of those human beings are not very conversant with the technology, the business models, or the language that is used by the sector. So where do you think we lie in communicating, especially the value proposition that DRE technologies like solar, or for example, small hydro or biogas bring? What are the areas you feel we need to focus on from a policy perspective?
There are a lot of policies already which are on paper great, but they are not translating into action. So there needs to be awareness generation. There needs to be build up, and again, possible funding and financing of communities of action. Because ultimately, your end users, if it is targeted to the population at the last mile or the rural or the tier 2, then where is the awareness building that is happening? So a lot of thought needs to go into there, and policies need to be broken down into simplified language for the end user. So we have often noticed that women are the ears and eyes on ground. There are a huge number of women entrepreneurs in the DRE sector, but policies are not made keeping them at the center. It somehow becomes, policies are made looking at probably a retail model or probably a top-down approach where they are forgotten, and once it comes down to their acceptability, they find it difficult to accept because there are a lot of local contexts that are missed. There are a lot of local challenges that have been missed. So yeah, a lot of thought needs to go into mobilization, into building that communities of action, building that awareness, possibly a BCC campaign. We see that health has done very well in terms of, driving a lot of BCC campaigns and mass media campaigns in terms of vaccination or MCH or anything. In the energy sector, that remains still pretty niche. The conversation remains very siloed at pockets, and that is where we need to demystify all the energy jargons and make it more local.
I think it's very, very important because when we look at achieving our goals, we need to ensure that everyone contributes, especially for the clean energy goals. Anyways, I think that we come to the end of this session. Just wanted to leave you with a couple of takeaways. One is that technology has evolved. That now technology can address a number of subsectors, sub demand sectors in the DRE space. It's a huge market out there. Business models are evolving. Finances are becoming more and more interested. I think that should be one of the new areas to push. The volumes might not be high, but I think from what I can understand from Upendra, the margins definitely are better. Yeah. Anyways, and with that, I'd like to thank the panelists. Thank you, everyone. Rohit, Upendra, Chaudhary, thank you for your time, and a round of applause for them, please.